Hello, and welcome to Warhammer 40k's Grim History from Beyond. I'm Ghazghkull.
And I'm Yuxin.
We are the chroniclers of all that was, and all that will be in the 41st millennium. We've seen the rise and fall of many empires. Over the next couple of months, we'll be discussing the tumultuous history of the world of Armageddon.
That's right, Zektar, and this week we'll be discussing the Big Cheese, the head honcho of the Big Green. That's right, folks, this week we will be talking about Ghazghkull Mag Uruk Thraka.
Right on. But before we get started, we actually got a couple more questions from our podcast listeners. I find it ironic, since we stopped doing the end of the month Q&A, we've got more questions. But that's the way it works, I guess. Let's start with Nathan T. And he asked, I was wondering, does this channel only cover land battles within the Warhammer universe? Or do void battles and void combat get covered too? I would love to see battles between the Imperial Navy and Traitor Legions or pirates, and covering ship classes, like the small sword class frigate to something like the Imperator Summonin. Quite frankly, we don't cover a whole lot of that stuff because we don't find a whole lot of lore on void battles. Most of the stuff, like when we're talking about, the subjects we normally pick are like different Space Marine chapters or different types of Xenos or something along those lines. And when you look at their lore, a lot of times there's a lot of void combat, quite frankly, isn't brought up as much as stuff that takes place on planets. But we have covered it occasionally. Like, for instance, Yuxin, I believe you covered quite a bit of the void battles that took place on Cadia during the 13th Black Crusade.
Yeah, and then I did a little bit on the battle where Alexis Pollux started weeding down the massive fleet that Pertrago had.
Right. And then I covered the Gothic War, which was the 12th Black Crusade, which had a lot more space battles in it. But I mean, we could probably look into it a little bit more on the next. Let's see, what are we doing next month? We're doing Dark Angels next month, per request from Hermes, one of our members. Yeah. So after that, anyways, maybe we could try to find something anyways on like how void combat takes place or something along those lines. But we'll try to sprinkle it in a little bit more. But our second question is from Royal Spuds.
What a great name.
And he asked, all this talk about how bad the Imperium is, the Inquisition going after its own people to cleanse them of corruption. Is Guilliman going to be able to reform the Imperium in time? Is the Emperor forever crippled? So let's answer the Emperor question first.
Yes.
Yeah, he's not getting up out of that throne, unfortunately. But there is tale, anyways, of the Star Child, and the concept behind that is that when the Corpse King breathes his last, and his soul and his body, anyways, end up separating, his soul will be launched out into the space time continuum, and it will fly through the galaxy, and it will jump into some random child in the galaxy, and the Emperor will be reborn.
Maybe as a guide.
Yeah, it could be anybody. That's kind of the concept behind it. Is Guilliman going to be able to fix the Imperium in time before? I'm assuming you're saying before the Imperium like implodes on itself. I think he's got a good shot, mainly for one sole reason. And Yuxin, you can disagree with me or not on this, anyways. But we'd love to hear what you have to say. But I think the main reason why he's got a good shot is because of the Great Rift. Humanity, this is for the first time in a long time, anyways, where humanity seems to have like something they can really focus on that is the bad guy, someone that is trying to take them out. I mean, before the Great Rift, it was always just kind of the slowly being asphyxiated by 1,000 cuts. This is like a big sword coming at you. So it's like, aha, we have something we can defend and attack. So I think anyways, that gives humanity a little bit more drive. And on top of that, anyways, so he can use that anyways as like a driving mechanism. And at the same time, behind the scenes, he can start moving pieces around so that he can slowly make the Inquisition weaker. And especially the one that I think he's really pushing for at this moment anyways, is the Ecclesiarchy, making that weaker.
Right.
So that's kind of my 2 cents. I think he's got a good shot at it as long as he keeps doing what he's doing. What do you think, Yuxin?
I think a lot of those are valid points. Part of the question is whether or not he'll live long enough. Not necessarily if he'll die of old age so much as if he'll die due to certain circumstances, being the fact that he's constantly on the front lines, or
But I thought we covered that already. He's a MacGuffin.
there are many things out there that are also trying to kill him.
Right. But like I said, I thought we covered this already. He's a MacGuffin. He can't die.
Plot armor, y'all.
Yeah. Yes, you do raise a valid point. If Gilliman dies before he can complete it, then yes, the Imperium is still screwed. But so hopefully that answers your question, Royal Spud. But shockingly enough, Yuxin, we do actually have a few more questions, and they're from Hermes.
Is it really that shocking?
Yes, not anymore. And he asks, his first question is, was there anything before the old ones? And the answer is yes. The first intelligent beings in the Milky Way system was the Catan. They weren't at the time anyways what we think of the Catan today. Well, okay, so they've gone through like 3 different changes. Their first thing anyways, they were just kind of these entities that were, another term for them were star vampires. And mainly because they were just kind of this dark entity that would float through space until it got to a star and then suck all the energy out of the star. And then it would move on to the next one, and then the next one. And then it moved on to this second kind of entity, which is what the Necrontyr ended up calling the Catan, or these which were known as the star gods. They were super powerful. They ended up helping overthrow the old ones during the War of Terra, which, sorry, not the War of Terror, the War in Heaven. It was a terrible war.
Wow, I didn't realize they were there on Terra.
Yeah. Yes, they pretty much helped the Necrontyr. Well, by that point, anyways, they were the Necrons. Defeat the old ones and the Krorks and the Eldari, and then the third change that they went into was when the Necrons actually revolted against them, and they got broken into thousands of different shards, and they were cast across the entire galaxy. But yes, so that's a little history anyways about the Catan. They're fairly interesting. They pop up every once in a while. There's still a couple of them still around that aren't thousands of shard pieces. Sometimes when they do get awoken anyways, their shard gets broken and then they escape, which is never a fun thing for anybody because they're pretty vengeful dudes. But hope that answers your question, Hermes. What's the next question that he's got?
That plus there were in theory entities in the warp, I guess, kinda, just none identifiable.
Okay, you're talking, yeah. So yeah, I didn't mention them because we don't really have any exact concept of what they were, but when creation started, there were 2 things that took place anyways that kind of came into the universe right after creation, and that was the Catan and then the warp, the Immaterium. And there were things in the Immaterium, but it wasn't. The Immaterium at the time, anyways, wasn't what it is today. It wasn't like full of demons and demonic planets. It was just another dimension, pretty much. It wasn't until the War in Heaven where it really got screwed up. But
so in other words, we can actually blame the old ones.
Yes,
causing everything.
This had nothing to do with them cooling. Let's just make sure let's
think about it this way. They're the ones who kind of created the Catan, because without them, fighting the Necrons wouldn't have,
Well, okay, they didn't create the Catan, but I mean, they went to war against them, I guess, is probably the best way to describe it.
Then they created the Krorks,
right?
Eldari, the Krorks, which are now orcs, which are a bane on pretty much everybody's existence. And then they screw up the warp, and so now the warp wants to kill everything in the Materium.
And one of those things, by the way, is part of question number 2, I believe, from Hermes. Is it not?
Yeah.
Which is?
And the question was, have enslavers been seen after the war in heaven? And for those who don't know, the enslavers were a creation caused by when the old ones started creating different races that used the powers of the warp to combat the Necrons and the Catan. When they used those forces, they started basically turning the warp into a hellish environment. And so it spawned things like, for example, the enslavers. The enslavers are actually, they are creations in the warp, but have been known to be able to exist outside of the warp without, like, demons where they are only temporarily or they have to have a host or something like that. They have been seen after the war in heaven. In fact, there is a inquisitor by the name of Malin, I believe. He says, call them what you will, Krell, sirens, or enslavers, just one witch unsanctioned caused the destruction of Hive Scorpios when one of those things used her brain as a gateway to this world. Within 3 days, the entire Hive's population was reduced to drooling mind slaves. Within 3 weeks, an entire continent was at war, and all because the governor thought his family should be exempt from the Psyker Cull and refused to give his daughter to the Black Ships. So suffice to say, they are still around. They're known to be around by the Inquisition. In fact, both the Ordo Xenos and the Ordo Malleus both are very interested in the enslavers because, for one thing, it is technically a entity of the warp, and B, it is also considered an intelligent Xenos species. So on both ends.
I just hope they don't really get their hands on any of them. Could you imagine what the Inquisition would do if they could reverse engineer an enslaver? Oh,
yeah.
I started to think, anyways, what that would be like. Ugh.
Don't really see that happening, though. Anyway,
why not? They're all the time, anyways, trying to figure out, anyways, how to reverse engineer stuff.
Yes, and how successful have they been most of the time?
Most of the time, they're not, but I mean, there have been a few times where they have been. But the other thing, though, I did while I was looking up, anyways, enslavers. I don't know if you noticed this or not, but there is records, anyways, of behemoth enslavers, which they don't mention what makes them different. They just call them. The Inquisition calls them something different. I'm assuming they called that because they're quite large, but
yeah, quite a bit bigger.
Yeah. Moving away from the war in heaven and the like of that, Hermes' next question was, how were the Custodes founded? Well, they were found like everything else during that time. The Emperor. Ta-da! Him and Malkador got into this whole concept of we need to make a bigger, better soldier. And the very first was the Custodes. Now, the reason why he never expanded on that, there's a couple reasons. One is a theory I have. Quite frankly, the simplest answer is it was too time consuming, it's too expensive. To make one custode, it's a nightmare. I mean, just genetically trying to build one of these things.
Well, basically, aren't you taking a child, completely genetically re-altering it?
Yes.
Into something else. It's not like the Space Marines where it's like, yes, we will modify you by giving you organs. No, he literally breaks them out into.
By the time a custode is fully grown, every single piece of it has genetically been altered.
Yeah.
That's the best way to describe it. So like I said, it's too slow. And obviously, anyways, he put in the whole concept that they can't procreate because he doesn't want little Custodes popping up all over the place. Which also, anyways, I think the other thing is that he made these guys, I think, quite frankly, he even looked at them as like too powerful. So it's like the very similar concept, anyways, of the problems that he had with the Space Marines. When he had that many of them, by the time there were that many of them, he's like, holy crap, this could be a problem. So there was this concept that he started putting things into place that they were going to eliminate the Astartes. Now, the Custodes, I don't think he ever had to worry about that for two reasons. One is because of the genetic altercations, they're completely and utterly devout to the Emperor. There is no, well, what do you think about,
going on vacation.
There is no vacation. There is only one thing, and that is the Emperor. So they're pretty much the guys who founded it was the Emperor and Malkador. If I recall right, they did it under the Himalayas or Azaleas, whatever weird name they were calling it by that point. But yeah, in the Imperial prison, I want to say. But what was his next question? Did you have any more questions?
Yeah. His next question was, were there any nations that joined the Emperor willingly?
Well, to answer your question, Houston, there was actually a couple of them. I'm probably not saying this right, but the Achaemenid Empire, they actually formed treaties and negotiations so that they didn't get stomped out by the Imperium or the Emperor. Ironically, anyways, if you're looking at Old Terra, this was right around anyways where the Middle East was. And that's actually where Arlon comes from, believe it or not. The second place is the Himalaya, also known as the Himalayan Mountains. Not the Himalayan Islands.
Himalayan Mountains. Where his lab was, right?
Right. The people that lived there were known as the Sigilites. Guess who came from them?
Huh.
Who do we know that's got that name?
I believe it'd be Malkador.
Yes. Who surrendered the fortresses of the Himalayans to the Emperor. That's where he started his whole campaign. And then the last group is the Saragorn Enclave. Now, their story doesn't end nearly as well because they're like, yes, we'll capitulate. And then they carried on doing genetic engineering in secret. And then the Emperor found out about it. So then he just kind of killed all of them because that's what he does. So the Emperor does not like to share his toys. Let's put it that way. Which leads up actually to the next question that Hermes asked, which is, who has survived the techno-barbarian era? So the Emperor, kind of. He's still kind of around. There's not a whole lot of people.
Well, technically Armon.
Armon would be one, yeah. He's still around. He was during that time. If there were any, actually, now that you say that anyways, any of the Chaos Space Marines that were part of the first foundings from Old Earth, there are any of them still around anyways and kicking, then yes, they would definitely still be around. I can't think of any off the top of my head other than Armon. But other than like Chaos Space Marines that have been chilling in the warp, the only guys...
Phil.
Phil. The Emperor's sandwich maker, the Perpetual, yes. He's still alive and kicking.
Not just the Emperor, everybody's sandwich maker.
Well, at this point, yes. But he was the personal sandwich maker of the Emperor for a time. But other than him, anyways, Constantine Valdor could still be around. It's rumored that he is the Yellow King, which is that has to do with the Eisenhorn chroniclings. They find he's one of the people that goes up against them. I talked about him in a couple of boxes, and for the life of me, I can't remember which ones I talked about. But the other guy that could be around is a man by the name of Eric Tyrannus, who was in fact actually a Thunder Warrior. Now, if you guys have recalled, anyways, when I talked about the Unification Wars last year, around this time. At the end of the Unification Wars, after they had conquered everybody, the Thunder Warriors, the Emperor was done with them. It's probably the best way to say it. The nice way to say it. The not nice way to say it, anyways, is that he sent off, after the final battle that they fought against the last Techno-Barbarian, he sent his custodes in and they slaughtered every single one of them. Or so he thought. One happened to survive. And his name was Eric Tyrannus. And he ended up escaping and living covertly in one of the cities, and he became a geneticist and found out anyways that the genetic progenoid glands that they put in the Thunder Warriors and the genomes that they put inside of him, they were starting to decay. So he was having to get new organs constantly until he ended up running into by the time of the Horus Heresy, he ran into a bunch of traitor space marines that had been taken prisoner, and he ended up grabbing their genomes, their progenoid glands, and he put them into himself and his lieutenant, and then he disappeared. So, and he was never seen from again. So could he still be around? In theory, Yuxin and I were talking about this. In theory, he definitely very well could be, because there's a couple of things, anyways, that we just don't know. Like, for instance, neither of us know how long a space marine can live, because none of them last that long. They all get shot. The closest I think we found, anyway, I mean, Dante's the oldest, right? At this point.
Yeah, that isn't in a dreadnought, yes.
Right. And he is over 1,000 years old.
Right.
And the other guy that I can think of is Barabbas. And he didn't get that old, but what happened was he ended up fighting the Harad, and one of their weapons was it's like an aging gun, so it like literally when it shoots something, it ages it by like thousands of years.
Right.
And he got hit by that a couple of times, and the concept was that he was about 3,000 years old when he was done with that campaign, and he was still functional and able to move around, but he was definitely a geriatric. So if that was the case, anyways, you're thinking, anyways, that Space Marine could probably live maybe 4,000 years, maybe. But then again, he was also a geneticist. So by that point, so he could have kept replacing a lot of his organs and whatnot as they started to decay. So he, like I said, he very well could still be alive, but it's improbable. Let's put it that way.
He could have also ended up in the warp, and once again, it's the warp.
Right. Very, very, very true. So do we have any more questions from Hermes?
Yes. If humanity's golden age is in the past, is there a possibility that there is a human empire more advanced than the emperors?
I'm going to say in the Milky Way system, no. Now, outside of that, anyways, who knows? I mean, we briefly talked about last time, anyways, why the Imperium of Man hasn't gone past the Halo star systems, but there have been ships that have been sent into the Halo star systems that have never returned, and everybody just assumes that they're dead, but who knows? Maybe they popped out in another galaxy.
Is that including abhumans?
What? More advanced? Oh,
yes.
You're thinking... I know what you're thinking. You're thinking of the Voton, aren't you?
No.
No?
The Voton are still up in there on why they're...
No. The Squats are not more advanced than Imperium of Man. They're part of the Imperium of Man. The Voton are their own thing.
They're not technically, or at least they weren't technically part of the human empire anymore. But anyways.
But I see where you're kind of going here anyways. The Voton? I mean, you could make the argument that the Voton were an abhuman species of humanity for the age of technology, and they moved off to do their own thing, and they're still kicking. They're clones now. You could, like I said, you could make that argument, but you could also very well make the argument anyways that they're actually Xenos in origin. So I would say no. We're not gonna get into that today, I don't think. The Voton. We might in a couple other boxes from now, but not today. Right. But within the Milky Way system, I don't think anyways there's a human empire that's more advanced than the Imperium. There were at a time, like for instance, the what do they call them? They found them during the Horus Heresy.
Like the Interrex?
Yeah, that's who I was thinking of. They were considered more advanced than humanity. They just weren't as big as humanity, or the Imperium, I guess. So when those are the guys, remember that Erebus screwed over, taking their sword, blaming it on Horus. So then they retaliated against Horus, and then Horus took his whole crusade and just pretty much wiped him out.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there were more advanced civilizations. They just didn't have the quantity or the largeness that the Imperium had, so they just kind of steamrolled them, unfortunately. But I think that's all the questions. So thank you all for the questions. But we should probably get back to Ghazghkull.
Yes.
He's starting out there, Yuxin.
Well, strange enough, in a curious twist of fate, the Imperium of Man may have had an unsuspecting hand in creating the most formidable orc of his era, and perhaps of all time. Well, that's up to debate. Anyways, after many Terran years of fighting orcs and monitoring their presence in outlying systems, the Imperium had learned that, under the right conditions, Even sporadic orc populations could multiply with startling speed. The rise of a strong warlord could unite the feuding clans, triggering a mass release of spores. Should this gathering grow large enough, it would act as a psychic beacon to orcs on nearby planets, drawing them into a swarming migration that built with frightening intensity. In less than a Terran decade, orcs could go from being a minor nuisance to the world's dominant species. The Imperium has found that if a rising war can be detected and countered early enough, the orcs can be broken and dispersed at little cost. Thus, in star systems known to be plagued with greenskins, various watchposts are deployed. In the Zornian system, the Dark Angels had established a range of monitoring stations coordinated by a command sanctum in a barren mountainous region of Urk. This hub routinely fed scans and other information back to the nearest Dark Angels vessels. In this way, the greenskin numbers were regularly checked, and the Dark Angels could also keep track of the feral human populations of that star system. For they were always searching for new recruiting planets from which they could draw battle-tested warriors. Ironically, it was this very monitoring station that set Ghazghkull on his journey to greatness. The first mention of Ghazghkull came some 9 Terran years before the Second War for Armageddon in 932.M41. The stripling warrior Ghazghkull was a trooper in a Goth clan warband that took part in a raid upon the Space Marines command sanctum. Although it was hidden atop a remote mountain crag on Urk, it was not safe from the orcs. Always seeking a scrap, the Greenskins discovered the hidden base and sought to dismantle it, triggering the base's auto-defense system. During the initial rush to claim the base, Ghazghkull was hit in the head by a bolter shell, a shot that pulverized a large section of his cranium and turned a sizable portion of his brain to absolute mush. It was quite possible that the young and profusely bleeding Ghazghkull might have been left for dead then and there, but for 2 circumstances. First, Ghazghkull got back to his feet, a sign of toughness and grit that any Goth respected. And secondly, it was widely known that particularly addled Death Skull's pain boy was paying those who brought him material to work with. The carrion birds did not feed on Ghazghkull that day, as his own mob guided him onwards. He was a stumbling wreck and had to hold his bleeding brains in with both hands. But they eventually reached the Death Skull's outpost of Rust Spike. There, his own mob traded Ghazghkull to Mad Doc Grotznik for the sum total of 3 teeth and a new chopper.
Pardon me, Yusuf. A couple things. One, a quick question. So, how is this the Imperium's fault?
Well, the fact that they had a station there that allowed his brain to be partially blown off.
Okay. I mean,
causes the subsequent events that we shall talk about in the future here.
That's pretty thin. I mean, he could have gotten shot by one of his own guns just as easily as an automatic sentry gun. I mean, but okay.
Yes, but in that case, they wouldn't have thought, that's a respectable person for being able to get back up. They just go, man, he get back up. Let's kill him.
Maybe. You know how orcs are. But the other thing, though, is that I would be remiss if at this particular moment we didn't mention a man by the name of Sebastian Barrett, because he will be very important to our story moving forwards.
Sure. Go for it.
All right. Well, Sebastian Baron was born on Talos 3 and unfortunately was orphaned at the age of 7. Raised by his maternal grandfather in a small community near New Cadon 5, he spent the next 3 years under the loving but harsh tutelage of his old Austro Militarum veteran sergeant, learning how to fight, lay traps, and stay hidden. Things were going well for the little family until the orcs invaded his homeworld. The world burned, and only young Sebastian survived alone, hiding from the greenskins, laying traps, killing Gretchen, foraging, and generally doing everything he could to survive, using all the tactics and tricks that his grandfather had taught him. After an Imperial relief flotilla finally arrived in orbit over Taos 3, several solar months later, Austro Militarum regiments were deployed. One squad on patrol picked up the lone 10-year-old boy, who then and there took the name of his grandfather, York, as his surname.
Oh, cheese and crackers! This is the origin of Old Bailey, the hero of Hades' Hive, Commissar Sebastian Yarrick.
Yep, one and the same. I thought you might find him interesting. But getting back to my story, after being found by the Austrian Militarum Patrol, he was taken by the Imperium Schola Progenium to be educated and indoctrinated, like most commissars. He learned the orc language from a human raider who had once been a prisoner of the Greenskins while fighting the orcs during a warg on the world of Rune. Since that time, he has extensively studied the orc mind and is considered one of the Imperium's leading experts on orcs. His years of the Imperial Guard were eventful ones, as he served in over a dozen war zones, and with regiments from Necromunda, Luther McIntyre, and Armageddon. His final assignment before retirement was a relatively lax post, running the recruitment program for the rebuilding of the 4th Armageddon Steel Legion Regiment. His last day as a commissar was to be on the Feast of the Emperor in the year 941.M41.
You're kidding. That was supposed to be his last day?
Yep.
Well, that's terrible luck for Ghazghkull. That's when he landed on Armageddon for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
But we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. Getting back to Ghazghkull.
Right.
Now, Ghazghkull came out of his haze immediately after Mad Doc Grotznik performed his pivotal operation. That he awoke was a surprise to both parties, for Grotznik had replaced part of the Goth Warrior's skull and brain with bionics wires and squig sinew, holding it all in place by riveting on adamantium plates. More amazement followed. Ghazghkull could see more clearly than he ever had before. This had little to do with his eyesight or new bionic eye, which truthfully was always a bit out of focus. Rather, for the first time in his short life, Ghazghkull awoke with a brand new vision. It was his destiny to rally all of Orkdom and lead them on the greatest war of all time. It was now his belief that he was in direct contact with Gork and Mork, the great green gods of the orcs. And Ghazghkull realized he had been chosen as the living embodiment of their divine wishes. They wanted him to lead the way towards the greatest battles in the galaxy.
Yeah, pardon me, brother. But before you continue, this sounds all interesting with Ghazghkull, but before you continue chronicling, how about you tell us about one of my favorite weird characters, Mad Doc Grotzkin?
Certainly. Well, the first time... yeah. Well, the first time Grotznik was chronicled was the event that I just mentioned, him saving Ghazghkull's life. And he did such a good job with it, they became very popular among his fellow Greenskins. His metallic skull surgery, better known as a Ghazghkull special, became all the rage among the knobs of Ghazghkull's war, and Grotznik's services were in great demand. Grotznik saw the mob of orcs waiting outside his tent as a great new opportunity to explore the wonders of the orc mind and to ensure his own position within the war. Unbeknownst to the recipients of the new skulls, embedded within each cranium was a device that exploded when triggered. Grotznik kept a wireless remote for each knob that received the surgery, and if he offended Grotznik, that knob would often come down at the end of a long day with an unfortunate case of exploding head. Eventually, the knobs caught on to Grotznik's scheme and planned a scheme of their own. One night, Grotznik was called to repair disabled Death Dread. When he arrived, the Dread sprang to life, pinning him down whilst the knobs that had been recent customers of Grotznik gathered close and laughed. The Death Dread powered up its buzzsaw and cut into Grotznik's head. The knobs left him there broken and bleeding. Later that night, Grotznik's Gretchen nurses brought their master back to his operating room. They began to operate on Grotznik in an attempt to revive him. During the night, one grot vomited into Grotznik's open head, and later, the spider crawled into a warm, wet place, Grotznik's head. Grusnik died several times that night, but was brought back to life with an inventive use of Grot Broad by his Gretchen. When Grusnik awoke, he was utterly, absolutely, and completely mad. He set out into the orc camp, cackling with glee that was punctuated by the heads of the tribe's top knobs exploding. Since then, Grusnik has been a practitioner of the most harebrained and dangerous surgeries, the most infamous being the squig brain transfer, which has spread like wildfire to the other orc pain boys because of his popularity. Grusnik has cut off several of his own limbs just to keep his hand in, replacing them with grafts from other patients. Some say he is making a super orc out of the organs and body parts from patients who have been overcome with generosity, whilst out cold on the slab. The only reason Grosnik has not been killed by a vengeful customer is the continued protective patronage of Ghazghkull Thraka, now perhaps the most powerful warlord in orc history following the conclusion of the Third War for Armageddon.
Yuxin?
Yes?
We've covered a lot of strange things in this Milky Way system, and I can honestly say that Mad Doc Grotznik is probably the strangest mad scientist in the galaxy.
You know what,
Right?
brother? You may be right. But getting back to Ghazghkull, the first to fall beneath Ghazghkull's iron-shod heel was the Death Skull's warlord, Dregmek. Ghazghkull had just emerged from Mad Doc Grotznik's grimy tent and was still rubbing his shiny adamantium skull when Dregmek approached. Striding down the streets that ran between the corrugated shacks of the derelict Death Skull's outpost, Dregmek demanded to know what a Goth was doing within the boundaries of the rest spike. Behind Dregmek, his entourage of knobs guffawed, anticipating a bit of sport. Undaunted by the massive cobbled-together combi weapon that the Death Skull's warlord was waving in his direction, Ghazghkull advanced, knobby fists clenched. Dregmek, expecting exactly such a move from a Goth, opened fire. Every barrel of his custom weapons began to blaze. They are filled with flying projectiles, and the flashing of half a dozen gun muzzles emitted blinding strobes of light. Perhaps it was a sign from Gork,
Or possibly Mork.
a stroke of divine intervention to save their prophet, as although explosions blossomed at his feet and bullets stitched patterns alongside him, Ghazghkull advanced untouched. The only sound were the last of the spent shells clattering to the ground, the spinning whirl of empty ammunition hoppers, a few desperate trigger clicks, the heavy tread of iron boots, and finally a rusty squeak as Dregmek's iron jaw fell open. So savage was the pummeling that Ghazghkull delivered with his bare hands that Dregmek's knobs cheered despite themselves. The headbutt delivered by Ghazghkull's newly armored skull finished the job with a resounding clang. Straddling the pulped body of his foe, Ghazghkull announced that this was only the beginning. He bellowed to the gaping onlookers that he was the prophet of Gork and Mork. And furthermore, his bold voice roared that if anyone was looking for some of the devastation he had just delivered to the former warlord, they could step up one at a time or rush all together. He cared not. After another hour of solid fighting, a battle in which Ghazghkull did not himself take any more damage than a scratch, he had taken over as rightful ruler of Rust Spike. Though it was hard to see much with their bruised and battered faces, it seemed to his new followers that Ghazghkull grew larger before their very eyes.
Well, after defeating Dregmek, Ghazghkull began expanding his horde by crushing the tribes within reach of his new stronghold. In addition to the Death Skulls that had followed Dregmek, there were now several Goth mobs beneath the young warlord. As tales of Ghazghkull's deeds circulated through the scrap heap villages and makeshift fortresses of Urk, orcs began to leave their tribes and head to Rustspike, looking to be part of something bigger than their own dismal warbands, fighting over the same old scrap. They wished to go to war with this new boss, who claimed to talk to Gork and Bork, who asserted that one day they would find richer targets. Soon, Rustbite grew so overcrowded that it was impossible to spit and hit the ground, so Ghazghkull went west. It was on the cracked plains of the Big Wasteland that Ghazghkull met his first setback. He had entered the territory of the Bad Moons, the richest and most envied of the local clans.
For those wondering what clan that is, they would be the Yellow Armored guys. And when we talked about war bosses a couple years ago, I talked about my favorite Bad Moon, Nazdrag Ugg Erdgrub.
Right you are, Yuxin. And Nazdrag has a part to play in the Wars of Armageddon, just not yet. On Earth, the Bad Moon leader was war boss Snaz Daka, and none could match the mix of firepower and mobility that was his bright yellow battle wagon brigade. When Snaz Daka saw Ghazgkull's hordes marching across his lands, he ordered his totem pole raised and the tents collapsed, and, faster than a run hood could throttle a wayward grot, the tribe was on the move. In the running skirmishes that followed, Snaz Daka and his boys were always able to lob a few shells into Ghazgkull's hordes before driving off out of range of retaliation. Ghazghkull had already proven his superior brawling skills by overpowering, bludgeoning, and working over all who dared challenge or defy him. Now, however, he was engaged in a battle of wits and tactics. Not a good thing for an orc, but here too, the up-and-coming warlord would display not just his superiority, but the kind of brutal showmanship that makes orcs punch their fists into the air and raise raucous cheers. Within days, Ghazghkull unleashed a number of countermeasures, any one of which would have proven too much for the Bad Moons to overcome. He and his lads sabotaged the supply dumps where the Snaz Daka refueled their battle wagons. Ghazghkull then gauged the wind and ordered several shanty towns put to the flame. The thick, acrid smoke drifted over the cracked plains, hiding the exact whereabouts of his troops' movements and making it impossible for the Bad Moons to flee until Ghazgkull's infantry was right on top of them. More impressively, Ghazghkull had coerced the fastest orc on Urk to join him by outracing him in a one-on-one duel of speed. All who saw it agreed that only the divine might of Gork and Bork could have allowed the now hulking goth warlord to outpace grand speed boss Shazfrag of the Evil Sons.
Sektar?
Yes?
Couple things. First off, for those wondering, the Evil Sons are the guys that'll do anything provided they're going fast while doing it. And second, there's a little more to the story about Shazfrag, if you don't mind.
Not at all. What did I miss?
Well, like you said, the two raced each other, and despite riding a rusted piece of junk, Thraka began to pull ahead. Makari the Grot was riding with him, and when Shazfrag attempted to win by shooting the fuel tank of Thraka's bike, the banner bearer acted quickly and shot the speed boss's gun first. Shazfrag's weapon then exploded and caused the speed boss to lose control before his war bike crashed into a wall. Luckily, Shazfrag escaped before the bike was destroyed, though he was left seriously injured. Thraka then won the race, and, now realizing this, Makari who had shot him, the speed boss congratulated Thraka on causing him to crash. The defeated Shazfrag then offered to serve Thraka, though the speed boss claimed there would be no ill feelings if Thraka killed him instead. The upcoming warlord accepted Shazfrag's offer, and the speed boss's Evil Sons forces joined Thraka's growing hordes.
I see. So perhaps not as ordained by the gods as one might think. Thanks for that tidbit, Yuxin.
My pleasure.
Regardless of how it happened, each and every one of Ghazgkull's tactics worked, wearing down the Bad Moons so that their defeat was inevitable. As the humbled Snaz Daka watched, Ghazghkull ordered the Bad Moon mechs to fashion an enormous power claw from the rubble of their ruined tanks. With the defeat of Snaz Daka, all the Bad Moons on the planet fell into line. So large had Ghazgkull's horde grown that no warband on Orc could hope to stand before his sweeping onslaught. Only the foolish, or the stubborn, even attempted to stand apart from the meteoric rise of this great green-skinned champion. Now, one such stubborn fool was a snakebite war boss, Grudbolg. Now, before we get into him, perhaps, Yuxin, You could briefly explain the snake bites to our listeners?
Certainly, Grod the Runt Herder probably described them best when he said, and I quote, "Live up the land, go to find war, kill what comes close, the old ways be best." These are the guys who raise the squigs, ride the squig hogs, and are not fans of technology, preferring the old ways of thumping your enemies with a club or stabbing them with the choppa. When we talked about the snake bites, I discussed probably the most famous runt herder ever, Zodgrod Wartsnaga.
Thank you, Yuxin. And by the way, Zodgrod, he's the guy that stuffed an actual orc into a shotgun gun, right? or
Yeah, a shock attack gun. Yeah,
yeah, shock attack gun.
vengeance for the guy using his special grots and Gretchens.
His commando grots. Yes. Now, thank you, Yuxin. But getting back to Grudbolg, it took a long, bloody solar week to subdue the snake bites under Grudbolg, and Ghazghkull was forced to decapitate the scar-old monster twice before finally winning his loyalty. When challenged to a headbutting contest by the hulking Goth champion Urgrak, Ghazghkull was like a pile driver, sinking his foe a full foot into the ground and knocking him unconscious. Urgrak's Knobs mob was so stunned that their undefeated leader had lost that they did not see Ghazghkull striding towards them. In a fury, Ghazghkull worked his way through the Knobs, leaving each senseless. When the heads of Urgrak and his Knobs finally cleared, they quite sensibly pledged eternal allegiance to Ghazghkull. Battles of attrition had raged across the surface of Urg for nearly 8,000 Terran years, with small tribes continually rising and falling, each time battering themselves and those around them into submission. No great leader had ever emerged from the endless cycle. Over all that time, none could unite the tribes. That is, until now. It took 6 standard years for Ghazghkull to fully subjugate Urk. Now grown larger than any warlord ever seen on the planet, he basked in his domination, inspired by the spirits of the rising Wog and Ghazghkull's impassioned speeches about conquering the stars. The orcs swarmed about the planet's surface in a flurry of activity. A smattering of ramshackle void ships began to arrive, as orcs from across the Zornian system felt the siren call of the Wog and hastened to join. For the first time, groups of mechs worked together, building in ways never contemplated before. Never before had they been able to mass their squalid resources. But now, all of the scrap heaps were as one. Crazed energies flowed as they cobbled together vast battle fortresses, new weapons, and towering engines of destruction. All the Urk's greenskins moved with a sense of destiny, an overwhelming realization of their duty, their very purpose for being. And then the sun flickered. All the greenskins looked up at the suddenly dim sun that had always lit the planet of Urk. All save Ghazghkull himself were cowed. The superstitious orcs dropped their weapons and spanners and stared upwards, slack-jawed in wonder at the celestial phenomenon. The sun flared, blazed, and once more its rays blinked. In a booming voice, Ghazghkull assured the quavering greenskins that this was a sign from Gork and Mork. It was telling them that it was time to leave Urk behind, that it was time for the galaxy to feel the might of the growing Wog. Even as the warlord spoke, a lone beam of green-tinted light illuminated the prophet of the great green gods. He told his followers to stockpile all the arms and ammunition they could, for they were leaving within the week. As there were few operating aircraft upon Urk, and the mechs had only just started to construct more, some greenskins wondered how this might happen. A single glare from Ghazghkull, however, was enough to silence their questions and instill in them, if not confidence, then at least a fear of asking how any such things might be accomplished. The next day brought no dawn. In this case, however, it had nothing to do with the strange behavior of Urk's sun. The warp currents had changed again, reverting to patterns similar to those of ages ago. As the tides of the warp roiled and twisted, they had also deposited an enormous space hulk into real space, vomiting forth a conglomerate void craft in the Zornian system. The hulk now drifted in Urk's orbit, blocking out the light from the flickering sun. Now, in a minute, Ghazghkull is going to have some more fun, grumping some demons. But what do you think so far of the Great Green Prophet's meteoric rise to power, Yuxin?
First of all, I can see his impassioned speechings be along the lines of, We're gonna go up there and we're gonna do some crumping.
Oh,
Pretty
you're missing the last important part of the very end there.
Yeah. Ooh.
Yep. Short, sweet, to the point. Just the way it works like it.
It'll be a big crumping.
Yeah. Yeah. Using his adjectives. Big.
Where every boy gets their own. No.
Chopper. We already have choppers. Shooter. I kind of like Ghazghkull. He's very he's very driven. I'll give him that. Normally, I mean, even warlords seem to have normally just kind of this concept of we're going after a planet. he's kind of set his sights far higher than any other orc that I've ever read about. We're not just going to take a planet. We're going to take the galaxy. There's enough of us to do it. Which, ironically, there is. You just got to get them all. That's the problem. Yeah. And I know. Okay, so here's my question to you. I know we've talked about Ghazghkull off the box a few times, and you're not a big fan of him. And one of the reasons why that you kind of come back to is just the concept that he is definitely, anyways, the most well documented orc since the Imperium, right? I don't think anybody would really argue that. And the problem, I think, the frustrating part that you have is that every time you try to read about other orcs, there's just not much on a lot of them. So, and you love the orcs, so you're just like, sweet, I need to find out about this guy. And you normally, the most we can find anyways is like a couple scribbles by some scribe in Imperial records, and you're like, that's it. But Ghazghkull, on the other hand, it's like mountains of books, all on.
Yeah. Or a perfect example is when he took over one of the clans. It just says, "Yeah, he took out the boss, and now the clan was his." It's like, well, can you tell us anything more about that boss? No. That's all you need to know is now he's one of the followers of Ghazghkull after he lost.
Well, that's kind of the way orcs work. I mean,
no, any interesting attributes? No,
because he got beat. Nobody cares about the guy that got beaten. History is written by the victors, good sir. But is there anything that you actually don't like about his actual character, or is it just the fact that he's just so well documented and all the guys that you want to learn about aren't?
It's more of that than anything else.
Okay, so there isn't anything anyways about his actual orkiness that you don't like?
No.
Okay. In that case, anyways, what do you think of his meteoric rise, I guess, to power here?
Well, it was pretty fast. It's interesting how he seems to be able to pull out more tactics with less brain than, well, actually, he probably had more brain by then than he did before.
It was the squig. That's really what this is all about. It was the squig that they put in there.
The squigs in you?
Yeah. Yes. It's kind of like, I don't know if you've ever seen this episode of SpongeBob from Terran 42, but there's an episode where Patrick, the starfish, who's just a complete idiot, he falls off this cliff and his brain pops off, and they replace it with what do they call it? Brain coral. It's brain coral. I think that's what they call it.
Oh.
Because it looks exactly like the top of his head. So then all of a sudden he's like this genius. It makes me think anyways that maybe that's what happened with Ghazghkull when they added the squig to his brain. Maybe this was a really smart squig. Well, I just kind of wanted to know what your 2 cents anyways on Ghazghkull. Okay, let me put it this way. What's your favorite part about Ghazghkull?
I guess the fact that he is willing to actually, I think the most interesting part of his rise is when it came to him finding that snake bite. The fact that he decided to, apparently he realized there was the best choice of having somebody following him as a leader was the guy that he decided to chop off his head like 3 times. Instead of just going, okay, fine, I'll leave you to die. Apparently he had some sort of recollection that, this person may be worth keeping around.
You think it was that, or do you think he was actually kind of a begrudging respect for the old man, the old orc that he killed 3 times? That every time that he killed him, he's like, submit. No, give me back my legs. I'll kill you, you little scallywag. You think it might have been a little bit of respect in there? It's like, you know what? I've killed this guy 3 times. Maybe we keep him around.
After the first time, he stuck his head back on, though. Instead of just going, oh, never mind, and just leaving him to die.
Well, yeah, I know. But what I'm saying is that I think, anyways, by the 3rd time, anyways, maybe there was some begrudging respect for this old orc because he kept fighting him. It's orcs. It's every time, anyways, there's a fight. It's just kind of, I mean, it's that concept, I guess, anyways, like orcs, for some weird reason, anyways, orcs just, it's the act of fighting that they enjoy.
Right.
So if you get an enemy, like, for instance, they love beaky boys. Why do they like beaky boys or space marines? Because they're tough. They're hard to fight. Yeah. They love fighting them because they're tough. And they fight proper. That's the other thing. They're willing to mix it up, and get in close. But, yeah, I was just kind of wondering what you're thinking. But getting back to Ghazghkull.
Yes.
As the solar flares and radiation storms wafted from Urk's tortured sun, Ghazghkull turned to his mechs and bade them secure the Space Hulk using super heavy tractor cannons. A few of the available spacecraft were equipped with harpoon rockets, and they fired these off to tether the colossal Space Hulk to one of Urk's twin moons. For the moment, the Space Hulk was pinned, but all knew it would not be for very long. Under Ghazghkull's orders, the remaining orcs rushed to assist the mechs. They worked nonstop to craft as many crude transport ships as they could. There were perhaps 100 constructions worthy of being called ships, while other craft were built to complete only a single journey. There were many hundreds of these crude rockets, each incapable of being steered, each with orcs and equipment wedged into every hold and crawl space.
Don't miss!
Yeah. Boarding the largest of the crude fleet, Ghazghkull led the great exodus from the planet to seize the Space Hulk. With exhaust flashes and more than their share of premature detonations and mid-air collisions, the departing void craft filled the sky. Some ships struck the Space Hulk's outer deck and detonated to blow gaping holes into the superstructure. A few rockets plowed deep into the Hulk to deposit their orc cargo, while the most sturdily constructed ships actually had the wherewithal to fly about the vast Space Hulk to seek out landing sites, or, at the very least, to enter the vast Hulk through the massive holes blown into it by the less fortunate orc rockets. Alas, as is so often the case, the Space Hulk was not unoccupied. As soon as the first wave of orcs landed, they were attacked by demonic entities. Burner boys, cutting their way through the bulkheads, had to suddenly shift from slicing metal to defending themselves against a tide of demons. Gouts of dirty orange flame were met in kind by arcane blue jets, as the Burner boys traded scorching death with prancing pink horrors. Before their ships had even settled, speed freaks launched themselves from cargo ramps, racing down the cavernous corridors, guns blazing. Less than half the orc spacecraft were able to lift off once again, but these disengaged in order to go back to Urk's surface to ferry more greenskins into the battle. The fighting took solar weeks, during which time billions of greenskin were airlifted off Urk to join the fray. So, real quick, Yuxin, you know how we've talked about Space Hulks and their sizes? I'm assuming this one was quite large. Yes. I think you get billions of orcs on this thing. This is one of the big ones.
Yeah.
Anyways, Ghazghkull himself led the spearhead that fought its way to the center of the Space Hulk. There, at the black heart of the jumbled amalgamation, there was an ancient void craft, none other than the vast star freighter Dominion. And shockingly enough, this wasn't the first time the Dominion had been in Urk space. You see, after leaving Urk, then called Heracles, to escape the orc attack, the void craft became lost in the warp, its terrified human cargo attracting the horrific creatures that dwelled there. But where its warp engines had once been located, there was now a huge warp rift. a darksome hole from which the energies of the Immaterium poured forth. The fight to take over the demon-held Space Hulk was a bitter battle through ever-changing confines. Neither side showed mercy, hacking at each other in the narrow corridors and turning vast cargo bays into slaughter pits where entire armies crashed headlong. Now and again, newcomers would join the fight, a fresh tide of demons sweeping from the Space Hulk center, or an orc rocket crashing through to deliver its living payload. Slowly, the orcs drove the demon host back, but at every junction lay an ambush and casualties were high. It was Mad Doc Grotznick who led a charge to win the landing bays of what must have been an old Imperial transport. The landing craft berthed within were still occupied by the skeletons of the long-dead pilots. A few landing craft that were still operational were commandeered to aid transport efforts. It was Urgrek's Uglies, the Goth Knobs mob, that fought their way into the asteroid embedded deep within the Space Hulk. There, in magma-worn tunnels, they pitted power claws against Hellblades, and in the end, only Urgrek's Combi Scorcher swept the path clear. In the larger holds, battle wagons lowered their death rollers to mash all opposition, before being countered by soul grinders, hulking demon engines, whose metal claws shredded the orc vehicles. Soon, orc tank busters were hunting the soul grinders, crawling through the air vents to send rockets corkscrewing into their unnatural foes, blowing them apart in sprays of flame and ichor. Behind the front waves of fighting came the mechs, wielding over patches, resealing airlocks, and repairing their battered engines of war. Okay, Yuxin, what's coming up next is probably my all-time favorite thing I've heard any orc ever do. We're going to have to talk about it. But having driven the demonic host before him, Ghazghkull ordered the massive firepower of his entourage be turned against the Terran reality. To his frustration, this did nothing to it. With a bestial roar and linking raw green energy from his reconstructed skull, Ghazghkull charged the rent. To further anger the warlord, his power claw proved equally ineffectual. And with an almighty challenge, Ghazghkull unleashed the full thunder of his best headbutt. There was a flash of green, an audible pop, and, at last, the rift collapsed upon itself. Whether it was the force of that blow or the latent psychic energy from Ghazghkull, it was done, and the demon threat ended, or at least for a time. The Space Hulk, which Ghazghkull named World Killer, was now in orc control. Just as the superheated gas cloud swept over Earth, World Killer shifted back into the warp. Okay, so before you move on anyways with his travels through the warp, we got to talk about that. That's probably the greatest thing I've ever heard an orc ever do. He headbutted a warp rift shut. I can't think of anything even that comes close. It's just whoa. Can you think of anything even that's close to that in orkiness?
No, not really. I mean, there was the time that one orc that ended up going back in time and decided to just kill himself so he could have his own favorite gun. Two of them.
Oh, okay, yeah. Forgot about that guy. I can't even remember his name, but which is just a paradox in and of itself. But because he's an orc, too stupid to figure it out, it works.
Well, ended up destroying the wad because of it, but
it's just perfect. Just the concept that he just like, if we can't get this to work, use your head. It's like the Toy Story bit for Toy Story 2. Use your head. Oh, I want to use my head. Except for he's Ghazghkull, so he's like, use your head. Whack.
I don't know. It was his idea, so he goes,
I know.
I will use my head.
Yeah. Use head. It will work. All right, well, we got to kind of wrap this up. We're going a little bit long on this guy. So, why don't you go ahead and tell us anyways what he did in the warp?
Okay, so how long Ghazghkull and his followers drifted in the warp? It's not known. Time passes strangely there, and the orcs keep no records, of course. They explored the bounds of the vast space hulk, finding strange technology, ancient machines from humanity's lost past, and other apparatus beyond their comprehension. For some, especially the Ghazghkulls, this meandering search included nicking everything not bolted down. As they worked alongside Burna Boys, whose arc welders cut through metal, the orcs were able to appropriate everything, no matter how well fastened it was. On Ghazghkull's command, many mechs began working on a force field projector. Meanwhile, competing warbands fought to gather scrap and minor wars broke out over salvage rights. This rivalry kept tensions at just the right level to prevent the volatile orcs from growing too bored. Sheets of iron decking were reworked into battle wagons used to plate up stompas or beat it into crude body armor to outfit knobs. In the mad furor to claim metal, several warbands were swept into the warp when they overstretched their boundaries and cut away sections of the Space Hulk's outermost walls. It was this kind of foolishness that allowed warp entities to re-enter Worldkilla. Several more demonic incursions plagued the journey, and Ghazghkull had to drive out the worst of these warp offensives personally.
Use your head.
With vicious battles breaking out across the Space Hulk, there was an abundance of violent whoa energy, and the orcs thrived and multiplied. Soon every cranny of the woodcraft was bursting with more greenskins. Everywhere swarms of grots scurried. The halls rang to the sound of chants, shoot-a-blasts, and the commands of the ever-busy mechs. Gradually, the demon tides ebbed. The jubilant orcs were beginning to get restless when sudden jolts alerted all that the lumbering Space Hulk was slowing down. With gut-lurching suddenness, Worldkilla ripped back into real space. What had been an empty void was now filled with the massive Space Hulk. Aboard the sprawling vessel, klaxons blared, and Ghazghkull's voice boomed out of the speakers and down corridors, telling all to prepare for battle. Like a tidal wave, the momentum of Worldkilla sent the Space Hulk crashing forward. It smashed aside defense stations while panicked picket ships accelerated to get out of the path of the hurtling wall of space junk. In 941.M41, the orcs emerged at the edge of a star system vital to the Imperium, aimed straight for the core planet. For them sprawled the immensity that was Armageddon, industrial giant of mankind's realm. The planet lay roughly 10,000 light years to the galactic northeast of Terra in the segmentum solar. No force in the galaxy could now stop Worldkilla from crash landing onto Armageddon. Guided by his visions, Ghazghkull did not wish to halt his flight. Rather, he welcomed the headlong plunge towards the world below. The acceleration built, and he bellowed joyous war cries as the hull blazed with fire and the Hulk thundered down from Armageddon's sky like a scrap iron avalanche. Up until this point, Ghazghkull had only made a name for himself on Urk, a little known and soon-to-be dead star system. Soon, however, his name would send ripples of fear across hundreds of thousands of worlds. Now, Ghazghkull was on a collision course with greatness. Surrounding Imperial fleets, long-range missiles, and planet's orbital defense lasers did their best to stave off the inevitable. Their firepower managed to shear away a few chunks of the oncoming Space Hulk, but they could not stop the terminal dive of Worldkilla, nor could they alter its course. Like, who could? Seriously, who could stop something that's big enough to hold billions upon billions of orcs? Just something that big?
I think this was more of an act of desperation than actually thinking they could stop it. It was just like, what do we do? I don't know. Shoot it. You know. I'm thinking that's what it is. But I'm sure there was that one.
Altered. No freaking kidding.
I'm sure there was that one confident guy, anyways, that was standing, you know, in front of the guns, going, "Fire at will. We'll stop this one." But everybody else, I think it was just an act of desperation. But sorry, go ahead.
Although shorn of a good deal of its mass by the desperate salvos, the enormous Space Hulk plunged through Armageddon's polluted atmosphere to crash land upon its largest continent, Armageddon Prime. The deep impact of the landing shook the entire world, and its blast wave caused untold devastation. A cloud of debris shrouded the sun. Hundreds of thousands of orcs were instantly immolated by the cataclysmic contact of the landing. Their losses, however, were but a tiny fraction of their number. As the shock faded, a few of the orcs realized that they should all have died in that epic crash. Ghazghkull claimed it was the protection of the god, although the force field projector absorbing the brunt of the impact doubtlessly helped. Regardless, the orcs roared their approval at being alive after the exhilarating ride. Eager to release their pent-up aggression, they poured out of drop ramps or simply blasted new exit holes through the already torn and rent ruins of the remaining holes. Ghazghkull divided his followers into 5 distinctive hordes, each under one of his most powerful warlords. These were leaders Ghazghkull had subdued upon Urk, ferocious orcs that had learned by fighting alongside him. Under the Death Storm's darkness, the towering war overlord pointed out the direction each of his sub-commanders should take. With a wave of his power claw, Ghazghkull launched endless columns of orc war machines and living seas of greenskin infantry. With one voice, many millions bellowed.
And on that note, we are out of time for today. Join us next week as we discuss
The Second War of Armageddon.
Fantastic! But if you enjoyed our little show, could you please be so kind as to push that subscribe, like, or follow button? And if you wish to help us expand our work on 40k lore, by all means, support us by joining our membership program on our YouTube channel, Tales of Asharaka.
yes, and most importantly, have a great day.
But until next time, this is Ekthar,
And Yuxin.
signing off.